The Idaho Technology Council presents Innovation Matters, a look at innovators, rule breakers, and thought leaders from across Idaho. From our studios in beautiful downtown Boise, here is your host, the CEO and founder of the Idaho Technology Council, Jay Larson.
Hello, this is Jay Larson with Innovation Matters. Today is July 6th, 2022, and we have a fantastic guest that's joining us today. Will Pott with Power Engineer is with us, and we just welcome Will. But first, Will, I hope you had a great 4th of July here recently. How was your 4th?
Thanks, Jay. It's good. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. The 4th was fantastic, right? It was sort of 68 degrees and clear, dark skies, and as many fireworks as any of the kids could count. So we had a great time.
Did you do your own fireworks and did
No. No, that's a law I follow.
Yeah, that's a law that you do. Okay, that's a good point. I think it's important to note that Will lives up in the Wood River Valley, right, Will?
Yep. Yeah, we live in Haley.
In Haley area.
The historic headquarters of Power.
Yeah, which is awesome. And by the way, my 4th of July was great. So I learned that I have a dog, a Jill Jack Russell, that's really good about noise. But if you take them too close to the fireworks, it's not good. That's what I found.
Yeah, our cats were hiding under different beds.
Is that right?
Yeah, they don't get along, so they each have their own room.
Their own room that they go. Right, that's good. So let's see, Will. Talk a little bit about what you do for Power really quick that brought you to Idaho.
Sure. So I came to Idaho 2 years ago. Early pandemic at this point. We thought it was going to be sort of mid to late pandemic. Turns out that was optimistic. And we came in summer of 2020. So I moved from DC with my family. We had been living there for 11 years. I worked for Power in DC for a while, focusing on the government market. Power is an architecture and engineering firm, primarily engineering, in the electric sector. And so there is a very large government market for that kind of service, and that was what I was focused on.
And it might be a good note, just really quickly,
sure,
on Power Engineers side of it, that you're really one of the stronger engineering consultative companies in the United States, right? In your area?
Yeah, number 3 in Power.
Okay,
so that's Engineering News Record releases a series of rankings every year, and we always check the rankings to see how we're doing. And so far, we've done pretty well. We're usually ascending, and usually towards the top half of every list, depending on how it's how you slice the data.
Yeah, that's great.
But for Power Design, it's an important company, but because the brand it sounds like the function. Power Engineers, right? It sounds like it isn't a company, but it is a company, and it's one of the larger ones. So our general counsel called it a sleeper company one day, and I thought that's exactly what it is. You wouldn't know it's there unless you are in the field focused on this service.
And one of the most amazing companies based here in Idaho, so it's pretty amazing. So
yeah, we turn 46 this year, I think.
Wow.
Yep.
46 years.
Yeah.
It seems like it was just yesterday when it was founded. I mean, and everything with Jack Hand moving back to Idaho. So you were attracted because you joined the Power Engineers back in Washington, D.C. on the government business side of it. Yep. And then we got you to move to to Idaho.
Yeah, I knew there would be some gravity to the Idaho headquarters, and that was really important to me. My wife's from the Northwest, so it was sort of there was a gentle pull that contributed, as well as the quality of life has been. We expected it to be a big change for myself and my wife and 3 boys, and it has been. It's been a very positive change. We really enjoyed it.
It's kind of you're coming from Washington D.C. area, to Haley. That's a big shift, huh?
Yeah, the opposite end of the spectrum.
And it's been good for the family, though, on this type of stuff.
Yeah, the way I describe it for people who haven't been here or to the Valley or to Idaho maybe at all is that everything is either 8 minutes away or maybe 10 minutes away or 20 if it's in Ketchum, or it's a day trip. And so, we only do the day trip or we do a relatively short trip. And that means that certain things aren't happening, like we were talking about kids' soccer games. We don't do so many of those. Or at least the variety of opponents is relatively limited.
Yeah, right.
But we do have more time to spend in between music lessons and school activities and that sort of thing, because those trips are no longer 48 minutes out and back. Right?
Yeah.
It's 18 minutes out and back, that kind of thing. So
that's
been a
we're glad,
welcome change.
Glad that you were able to get here, and it's working out good for the family and you and your wife and your 3 boys. That's awesome.
Thanks. And the role has actually changed a little bit since I came.
Yeah.
And that's part of how we got to know each other was shifting away from that sort of selling into the government market focus and more into the innovation ecosystem focus. And how does Power as a company participate more deeply in what's happening in Boise, what's happening in the energy sector in America, worldwide potentially? How do we get more engaged and both gain more and give more in a very dynamic environment?
So you've changed since already you come. You've had a shift to be able to look at the changes within the electrification of a area. Is that primarily? I'm just trying to make sure I get my.
Sure. Yeah. No. There's if we think about the clean tech sector as a whole, right, there is multiple ways that you can sort of qualify for clean tech, and I'm doing air quotes.
It was good though. I liked it. Bunny ears. I call them bunny ears.
Yeah. So there's lots of things that are sort of technical and good.
Yeah.
Right. You are either cleaning up water pollution, air pollution, making energy cleaner from the start. Making agriculture greener. There's sort of a lot of different things you can do, and that market as a whole has gone through its, hills and valleys.
Right.
It's in the middle or maybe at the crest of a resurgence, right, of added interest, added capital, added innovation, a lot more activity. And we see huge change in the electric sector, right? Partly driven by the explosion of computing power,
right?
By the explosion of available data, and by the ability to automate some of the things that were done by humans in the past. And so the relative technology hasn't changed. All the physics are obviously the same as they always were, but our ability to deal with the physics and to integrate them to each other, right? So this large nuclear plant, a medium-sized coal plant, a large wind plant, and somebody's office building or single-family residence, those are all operating at very different scales, and integrating them together is mathematically complicated. It's now much more possible than it was even 10 years ago. And so, that's one axis of innovation. There's also sort of battery chemistry happening, right? There's also material science happening in the design of wind turbine blades,
right?
The coatings, all of the coatings of PV panels, right? The actual glass that goes on the front of the panel is changing, and so there's this giant waterfront of innovation, and some of it matters more or less to our business and to our practitioners, but we want to make sure we're engaged with it.
So that's a good, very good point. Just of curiosity on this. With all the change that's taken place, this waterfront, you're just kind of describing this landscape. How do you keep up with all the changes yourself as power engineers? I mean, because this isn't an easy. When you take a look at how and what's supposed to be taking place with respect to renewable energies over the next 10 to 30 years, it's going to be a lot of change, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're blessed in several ways. One is because of our age and our history of success, we've grown to a reasonable size. So for an engineering firm, we're quite large, nearly 3,000 employees this year. Wow. And so that means we have lots of tendrils, lots of people paying attention to different things in different pockets of expertise, right? Somebody is focusing on the glass in a PV turbine, the glass in a PV cell. Someone else is focused on the way that a wind turbine is generating and the reliability coming out of that machine or that set of machines. And someone else, again, is focused on the integration of large and small scale, either customer-sited or central generation, as we would call it. So we have lots of tendrils. We have very, very smart people. I'm just going to come out and say we've got some of the best people. And I think the other thing that is in our favor is we've historically made our our business and our brand on the back of very difficult projects. We've really thrived on the hardest things to solve, and that does put us on the cutting edge in many ways. We don't catch every single wave that comes ashore, but we do get called and get engaged in some of the toughest projects and the most complicated projects that haven't been done before. And so we have a history of being out on the edge.
On the edge.
And what we want to do now is continue to keep pushing ourselves, even in places where maybe it hasn't been our historical focus. Our historical focus has been on the kind of heavier, larger parts of the electrical industry and some other adjacent industries. But some of the very fascinating innovation is not necessarily in that core part of our business. It might be at the edges of our business or in some of our smaller business units.
Right.
And think about food processing or siting and routing of infrastructure, whether it's electrical or water or otherwise.
Do you? I was really kind of amazed when you start talking about this digitization of America. I mean, just simple little things from where you used to have to go to periodicals to be able to get data and information, right? Or encyclopedias. I mean, just really old stuff, right? Yeah. Now you have information at your fingertips because data, being stored in these massive data centers, and to be able to have all these access at your fingertips in a lot of ways is this has got to create a lot of changes within your with your industry, right?
Definitely. I think the first order effect is that it makes it way more salient.
Yeah.
Right. All of a sudden, it's more like you don't have water in the tap, and it's less like, oh, the grass is getting a little long outside. Right. It's not something that you have the patience to deal with anymore because it's existential.
Right.
It's not that the card and the card catalog is faded. It's that the card catalog doesn't exist because the power's off, right, or your internet's down, and your provider hasn't restored it, and therefore you have no card catalog, you have no library, you have no pen and paper.
Right.
You have just nothing you can do, right? You have to take the day off. And, for many people, that's not really a realistic option, especially when those days kind of progress one against the other. And so it feels, I think, much more salient, much more existential than it did. But it also means that, from an engineering perspective, when it works, it has to work a lot better. A brownout is different for an incandescent bulb, right? You're walking through the card catalog and you're like, oh, it's dim here because something's going on. But if you're trying to go through your CPU to get to the card catalog and the power quality isn't there, it won't work well, right? It either will sort of cancel and fault out and not work, or other things will happen. But it's not the same as just reading by a dim bulb, right? The tolerance for low quality power is gone in many ways.
Right.
So we have to think about like the classic example is a data center or a medical application where you can't have faults, you can't have outages. You're looking for what they call sort of 6 nines or 9 nines of reliability and percentages. And that's happening more and more. So more and more of our applications fall into those high requirements categories.
Yeah, and Will, what's crazy is that, aren't we spoiled in a lot of ways? Because most people just take for granted that you have energy, and the energy is going to be up almost all the time. Rarely do you have. In Idaho, I don't know how rarely do we seem like we have an interruption of service of any kind, right? So
yeah. I think we are spoiled, and I don't have all the data committed to memory, but the Northwest in general is both blessed with relatively cheap power and relatively high reliability power.
Yes, yeah.
I think the biggest threat to us is wildfires, and that has been more and more salient in the last few years, obviously. In some cases, and I don't think this applies to the Northwest this year, but it definitely applies to California this year, just reservoir levels, behind the hydro, that is another sort of big factor in our ability to serve our own needs. But that's not a surprise, right? You can see the level of the lake, right? And it doesn't change immediately. It's not like a wildfire that happens overnight. I think we're blessed with some of the best and the cleanest power in maybe in the world, but certainly in the country.
Well, and that has been a great thing about having Idaho. I think has most rivers miles than any other state in the union, right? So it's always good to have that hydro. But But let's talk about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If you take Power Engineers, if I'm going to say, is a very innovative company because you're helping, with the future of the energy grids, everything's taking place with electrical modernization within our country and the world, frankly. So if that's the case, what's going to be? Let me turn this. Several states have made it so they've mandated that certain percent of energy needs to be brought in through renewable energy by years in the future. Like some have said by 2035 you have to have, 45, 60% of your from renewable energy. That being said, what do you see as the future of electrification of the United States? And what are some of the opportunities that you see for the future for Power Engineers?
That's a very good and very big question. I think to start from the beginning, the pattern you described of electrification, right? Pushing more and more activities to be electrically supported, whether that's transit, personal transport, water pumping, displacement of space heating by gas or petroleum in certain jurisdictions. The more and more we push to the grid, for my personal preferences, I think that's great because it's easier to clean up electricity than it is to clean up petroleum. It's easier to generate it more cleanly with fewer or different environmental impacts. Let's say that. So I think that's personally a positive evolution. It does mean, though, that the grid has to handle a lot more, right? We have to now deliver up to, let's say, Ketchum, all of the space heating. Play all the things forward. We have to deliver all the space heating for the Wood River Valley up through one line from Mountain Home to Ketchum. I'm not sure exactly where that line goes, whether it goes through Mountain Home or through Twin, but that one line has to carry all that power.
Right.
It also has to carry all the power for all the Teslas and the other electric vehicles.
Right.
And it has to carry all the existing loads that it already serves. And because it's warmer, it now has to carry air conditioning. Right. Now we have to air condition the Wood River Valley when we didn't have to do that 30 years ago. So all of those things are happening, and that line has to grow in its own capacity. If we add to that the requirement that the power be cleaner and doesn't come from burning diesel in the sort of worst possible case, and does come from cleaner fuels, and we can make a list of our own political preferences about what those are. Some people include nuclear, some people include old hydro.
Right.
All those things change, but
right.
To me that means a few things. One, that the wires have to get sort of bigger and heavier. They just have to carry more. And so you're either proliferating small wires or making bigger ones at the fundamental level. That may mean making more use out of existing corridors, or it may mean creating new corridors, each of which has a political process behind it,
right,
to site the corridor and disrupt habitat or other people's ownerships or interests, all that sort of thing. It also means that we have to figure out how to fuel all of that. Right, we have to convert everything into electricity to deliver it.
So if you're saying the fuel, what are going to be the sources? Obviously, there's only so much you can get out of hydro, right? So what are going to be some of the other sources you see over the next 10 to 15 years?
I think one of the most exciting things that I've seen and talked about in the last 6 months are the potential evolution of next generation nuclear power coming out of American startups. And that's a combination of government involvement from the federal government, the Idaho National Lab and some other labs, and the series of nuclear-based startups. Because that the traditional old school nuclear, or what we would think of as sort of mid-century nuclear that has supported our fleet for so long and supports major economies around the world, it has its downsides. Obviously, it has plenty of upsides. It does continue to be very cheap on a variable cost basis. But it has a gigantic capital appetite. It's very hard to site. It's very hard to cool. You need giant amounts of water to keep it cool, unless you're using a kind of a specialty cooling mechanism that they have in some desert environments. But the promise of new, smaller, more modular nuclear reactors, either with different containment mechanisms or fail-safe mechanisms for the fuel. And I'm not a nuclear engineer, so I'm going to get to the frontier of my knowledge, and I may go over it without any of us knowing.
I like that.
But
yeah.
So the ability to step past the still very valuable mid-century nuclear engineering into the next generation of that technology is really exciting, both from a sort of domestic clean energy supply perspective, as well as from a fuel safety perspective, as well as from a geopolitical perspective.
Wow.
I mean, it's thrilling. We still have challenges with where to get all of the enriched uranium and the sort of rawest of the materials that we would need to do that. That's still a challenge. But the ability to integrate that value chain in a sort of domestic way, just like we're trying to do with batteries, it's there. It can be done. It just takes a lot of engagement and sort of a specific planned set of investments.
Do you it's kind of fun because I know meaning Power Engineers made a pretty big investment in the future of nuclear, meaning that you made an investment, you purchased a company out of New Jersey several years ago.
Yeah.
What about like solar? Where do you see solar coming in?
Before I worked at Power, I worked for the federal government trying to put solar and other renewables on government land.
Yeah.
I would say that was relatively successful at the size and at the stage of maturity that the solar market was. At this point, all of that work has been dwarfed by the uptake of solar around the country. Right? There are solar farms everywhere. Right? That technology is I wouldn't call it too cheap to meter. Right? It's not like the sort of jokes from the 1950s about nuclear. Yeah. But the bid prices for those assets are so cheap. They are able to produce and deliver power at prices that you wouldn't believe. I mean, it's sort of, in some cases, sort of 1 penny. Right?
So the one that's out here, west of, I guess east of Boise, as you start driving towards, your home up in Wood River, what is that? Is that doing the same type of thing with low cost solar?
It's a good question. Everybody's PPA is different and private.
Okay.
So we might be able to discover it with some research, but I don't know enough.
Don't know that one. Okay, so maybe the question would be: hasn't it been storage has been the big issue with solar, or is that still the issue?
That is still the issue. So you still see what we call transients. So when a cloud goes over the sun. You can see it, and you can see it in my camper, right? I've got a little folding solar panel. But you can see the output dip, and when you propagate that across several acres, it's a big dip. And so storage technologies can do several things for that. All right, they can start to smooth out the dip so that the perceived input from at the gate of the farm is flatter and better. Right, we all like predictability, right? So Idaho Power also enjoys predictability, and when the stuff coming out of the gate is flat and clean, much better, highly preferred, much higher prices, so they pay more for that higher quality power. And if to the extent that you can add those services behind your gate before your customer sees it, great. And that's also been getting vastly cheaper over time.
Wow!
And so the ability to use open, sunny land to create clean, high-quality power is dramatically expanded from 10 years ago, even from 5 years ago. And I think that's certainly here to stay. The limiting factor, I think, depending on who you ask, right, the limiting factor from a chemical perspective is probably lithium, right? It is a volatile and relatively rare and expensive element, so people are looking at alternative chemistries for battery technology that would allow you to clean up the power in the same way.
Will wind have? Was solar going to be much stronger than wind, or what? What are your thoughts there?
I think they'll both coexist forever.
Okay.
The major untapped resource in America right now is offshore wind. Right. That program, the ability for the federal government to bid those lands out hasn't existed until the last few years. Started with Rhode Island and is starting to take off on the east and west coasts. but that was just a closed market. It technically and fundamentally existed the whole time, but the government wasn't set up to do it. They were only willing and able to lease for petroleum drilling. Wow. So that's improved. But the ability to release land for solar, you can do it. I could do it if I had any land. The government, what I was doing with the feds 10 years ago was trying to help the government release that land for solar on dry land.
Well, and the solar that we have right now, there's the ability to be able to have materials so you can turn around and just have these buildings downtown Boise can generate electricity, right? By some of these. It's going to be, it'll be a fun thing. But I know power engineers is going to be, the one thing I do know, power engineers will always be at the forefront of all these changes because that's what you do, and you do it really well.
We certainly hope so. That's exactly what we're focused on is trying to make sure we're engaged in those changes and contributing what we know. Like I said, we have some very, very smart people, strong opinions, a lot of experience to offer, a lot of customer knowledge to offer about how, if you have a product, how does one make it attractive to a utility or other customers? What makes it more or less useful? And so it's an invaluable piece of the puzzle.
This has been. I know we've talked about a lot with what Power Engineers provides, and the services, and how amazing of an asset Power Engineers is to Idaho. So thank you very much, Will, for all of that Powers does. And I need to make sure I let listeners know that Will has just replaced Jim Haynes, who is who's the CEO of Power Engineers, as our board member. So we really appreciate having you on our executive committee, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And just to make sure, I'm not replacing Jim Haynes as CEO of Power, because he would that would be a difficult conversation tomorrow morning. But definitely happy to help on ITC's board in any way that we can.
Yeah, we thank you for that clarification, and we certainly have always appreciated Jim on all he's done for the innovative ecosystem in Idaho. Okay, so we have, to end this whole segment, we've got a quote that we'd like to get your thoughts on, okay? So Mahatma Gandhi said this: "Freedom is not worth having if it does not include the freedom to make mistakes." What are your thoughts?
I think that's, like many of the things that Mahatma Gandhi said, has sort of, it's so sort of... it's so clear, right? So it's so simple that it can't fail to be true. It's something we work on every day, right? If you think about part of the job of an engineer in his or her day job is not to make mistakes, right? Is to make sure that bridge does not fall down. There is no spark in that substation, right? That is there is no room for error, right? That is, your license is on the line. And I'm not an engineer, but I'm describing the process of licensing oneself to create public infrastructure. And my wife's an architect, so she's been through this as well. Right. And so in the design process, it is exactly the opposite, right? Mistakes are intolerable. We do everything we can to avoid them and protect ourselves and our customers against that. So we design all of these business processes to erase or to block mistakes and to clean them up before they go out the door. And much like a military operation does.
Right.
And part of the tension, especially in an engineering firm that's focusing on innovation, is to free up that part of one's mind to make mistakes and say, hey, this may not make any sense right now. You may not even believe the physics that I'm describing to you right now. But stick with me here. Keep going. Listen for a couple more minutes, or come back to it in 90 days and see if the team has changed, right? See if the team has gotten to another point, and we'll tell you the same story but with a new twist, and maybe now you'll start to hear it differently. When you first heard, like, never, no way. Someone told me a story 2 months ago about creating output from a PV farm at night. And
at nighttime?
Tried to hang up the phone, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And so it is, in theory, possible, right? So we've sort of laughed about it, like yes, we're talking about that, but no, it's not happening at scale. but yes, let's talk again.
Right.
Yeah, so you know, it a little bit of both, a natural skepticism and an obligate perfection in the design that actually kind of comes out of a design firm. But for technologies that are on the cutting edge, they're going to have to fail, right? Software is different. Software can fail. You can have a buggy app in your iPhone for years and not even bother to erase it because it didn't do any damage, right? So a software development process can be very, very different. And so there is a middle ground too, where a hardware development process is going to go through a buggy phase, and you know, we need that expert support in many ways, right? It doesn't come from somebody with no background. It comes from somebody with the engineering license,
right,
who can tell you this is going to fail because of X, and can step in and rescue it, and be patient enough with the technology and the founders to see them across that what we would call the valley of death.
But it is so important to have people that understand what they're like. What Power Engineers does, be able to identify the routes to understand safety that's associated with these critical questions, but understand this when you ask what if questions, right? Like, what if we did this one? What if we were able to do this a little bit better? Could we get better gain? Could we get better throughput on certain things, right? So it's great having people like Power in our state, and we appreciate it so much, Will.
Well, thanks, Jay. We appreciate it. Idaho has been a great home for Power for a long time. So
well, and we hope it's going to be a
generation or two.
Yeah, at
the very least.
What's you just said earlier?
46 years.
46 years. Mm-hmm. And we hope that there's going to be 46 years of Will Pott and family in Idaho too. So
I hope so too.
Yeah, I hope so. Okay, so thank you so much, Will, for being our guest today, and we really appreciate that. Please join us on our next Innovation Matters, because in Idaho, innovation really does matter. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Innovation Matters is a production of the Idaho Technology Council. For membership information and to get involved, visit our website at idahotechcouncil.org. Thanks for listening and helping us transform Idaho's future together.